By 8:30 a.m. Eastern Standard Time, there are additional drones in the skies around Blacksburg. In nearby Christiansburg, Virginia, Wing Part 135 operations are delivering essential medications and supplies to vulnerable members of the population who are disproportionately affected by the storm. The general community and public safety officials alike observe these newcomers and want to understand the nature and cause for the increased drone sightings. The recreational hobbyists Bill and Anna spot the Wing delivery drones while streaming video for Instagram Live, and curiosity drives them to check their remote ID interface to request identification. The remote ID interface provides Bill and Anna with limited, publicly available information that reassures them that the flight is authorized. Meanwhile, leaders at the Radford Army Ammunition Plant are increasingly concerned about monitoring and protecting against unauthorized UAS operations. The commanding officer at Radford spots the nearby TV station drone and submits a public safety request for identification using the ANRA Broadcast Remote ID, which allows her to confirm its legitimacy. Once the commanding officer at Radford receives the relevant information identifying the drones, she breathes a sigh of relief and takes her unit off elevated alert.
Use case 4 is going to demonstrate the use of applications, phone apps, or other technology to allow the general public to understand what the drones that they see in their environment, whether or not they're allowed to be there to assure them that it's not a nefarious activity that they need to be concerned about.
As part of this use case, we're taking a look at validating the ASTM international standards that have been put forth for remote ID services. In looking at the standards and validating the standards, there is both the broadcast perspective. This is the broadcast that is coming off the drone itself with a set of identifying information for the drone, as well as a network capability that's looking at information sharing of these same broadcast messages amongst other USS in a ecosystem that has information being shared with both USS and, if needed, can be shared to the FAA.
We'll be testing several of those approaches that the standards bodies and others work to develop to understand how effective these technologies are with regards to the range of the broadcast and the effectiveness of the network solution and their ability to provide the information that the public, and in the case of the public safety folks, that can receive enhanced information, whether or not that information is effective in solving their needs to identify UAS operating in the vicinity of themselves.
A very clear analogy between remote ID and something that already occurs today is that of license plates. License plates provide traceability to an automobile and the user of that automobile for those authorized to get that information. Remote ID is essentially the same type of capability, however, it is in a more digitized manner. This occurs with safe and secure data exchange between the drone itself to the USS or the drone itself to a third-party application. This is one of the cornerstones of enabling remote ID and providing traceability to those conducting a particular type of operation.
So in contrast to the information that the general public has access to, the public safety community, appropriately approved individuals, would indeed have access to connect the license plate on the drone to the drone owner or the drone operator. And as you might imagine, that's a key piece for law enforcement and public safety to be able to have at their disposal to do their jobs for enforcing laws and ensuring that the operators of these drones are indeed following the rules.
The public is able to contact their local public safety entities in order to provide them with the remote ID number based off of the broadcast that they receive. Potential apps from our USS partners that are being created can enable that type of reporting process to a local public safety entity. And for our public safety partners, especially those with elevated privileges that are attained via the FAA, they are able to request further information from the FAA in order to get a holistic set of pictures of of the operator and all their associated information that is held within the FAA. The remote identification capability will allow us to safely integrate UAS into our airspace. It will also address the public safety and security concerns for general public as well as government stakeholders regarding the integration of these drones into our airspace. This will look to, in the future, enable operational capabilities such as the beyond visual line of sight operations.
In part one of this scenario, as the U.S. and Canadian Border Patrol personnel get set to play their softball game at Pinty Field, southeast of the farmers market, traffic monitoring and FBI surveillance drones conduct operations over the park. A food delivery drone brings pizza to help the players carb load before the game, then promptly departs the area. A recreational user named Danny is in the park nearby and watches as the softball game gets underway. He launches his UAS to get a better view, flying repeatedly over the crowd. A local law enforcement official from the Oneida County Sheriff's Department notices Danny's UAS and notifies other law enforcement officers in Rome. A federal official from the FBI steps in to help retrieve the necessary information. The FBI official initiates a correlation query with the Federal Aviation Administration, which provides identifying information about the UAS and its operator. The FBI official uses this information to determine that Danny is a regular who commonly flies his drone at this park. The official is also able to determine that Danny does not have a waiver to operate over people and contacts Danny directly. In part two, while the FBI official engages with Danny, a Canadian Border Patrol agent named George slides into third base and lands at a painful angle, fracturing his left arm. The Oneida County Sheriff arrives on the scene and requests an emergency services drone to deliver a splint for George. Jane, an emergency services UAS operator, initiates a medical use UVR to alert other operators around Pinty Field of her mission. She dispatches her drone from Griffiths International Airport and into the BVLOS Rome-Oriskany corridor. Meanwhile, the other drones either adjust their flight paths around the UVR, hover in place, or land to get out of the way. As Jane's UAS approaches, the FBI uses remote ID display services to verify that her drone is legitimate. She successfully delivers the splint to the Oneida County Sheriff, who is now equipped to address George's injury. While the medical drama unfolds, a spouse of one of the U.S. Border Patrol agents is watching the game and notes the number of drones in the airspace surrounding Pinty Field. She is well acquainted with the surrounding woods and is active in the local chapter of the National Audubon Society. She wonders about the proximity of the drones to protected bird habitats and later shares her concerns with local environmental authorities, who initiate a historical query with the Federal Aviation Administration. A historical query gathers UAS operations data in a limited area over a select period of time for drones that were using USSs. The historical query data includes location, time, and reference numbers, but doesn't provide personally identifying or contact information for the operator. Nonetheless, the information assists authorities in determining that the drones were flying sufficiently far enough away from the bird habitats, minimizing the impact on wildlife and preserving conservation efforts in upstate New York.
One of the highlights that we wanted to showcase and explore and evaluate is that once an entity is able to access that remote ID information and that ID itself off of the aircraft, we wanted to provide an app or a way for authorized entities with elevated privileges based on policy decisions that are to be determined will be able to ascertain an additional set of information. This set of information includes that held by the FAA in various databases, such as the Drone Registration Database, the Pilot Certification Database, the LOA Authorization and Notification Capabilities Database, to provide these authorized entities a holistic picture with data correlated to the remote ID that they have received from an aircraft. We're looking to address the feedback that we've gotten from a security perspective in order to enable those that have the authorization to go and take the necessary actions based off of a remote ID and the information held within the FAA.
Use case 5, it's in the same exact area around the softball game. We have our sheriff's people down there, and they pull out their remote ID application, and they look at the aircraft that are listed on this remote ID application, and they don't recognize one of the aircraft. But the remote ID application specifically tells them identification of the aircraft, and it tells you where the pilot is located. So the public safety officer locate that person who's flying via hand controller in the park, because it's not necessarily safe here. We got 8 other aircraft flying, and we're trying to do this, particular missions here in this game that we're playing and stuff like that. But during the game, what happens is a person gets injured, and we have to call in a medical delivery for a first aid kit and a splint. So what we do is we launch an aircraft from the test site. It's a true beyond visual line of sight flight, utilizing the New York US test site's COA to fly this. We did provide visual observers as a safety function. This entire flight was flown from our operations center that was located 3 miles from the actual softball field. Because of the long distance of the link, it was flown over an LTE connection and flown down to the ball field carrying a first aid kit. It takes approximately 15 minutes to get down to the ball field from the New York test site, and that aircraft enters that particular airfield area. The venue at the farmer's market is still flying. This is our maximum airspace density. And at this point in time, including live aircraft and simulations, we'll have 16 aircraft flying in the area. As this aircraft enters the area, again, a sheriff's person pulls out their remote ID device, which is their cell phone, and they identify this aircraft and make sure, in fact, it is an aircraft that they recognize, and it gets identified as the emergency medical services aircraft that's coming in. It's identified as a valid aircraft. Then it lands, makes its delivery, and then that's where we pan back to downtown Rome, and then we close out our events for the day.
The remote identification capability will allow us to safely integrate UAS into our airspace. It will also address the public safety and security concerns for general public as well as government stakeholders regarding the integration of these drones into our airspace. This will look to, in the future, enable operational capabilities such as the beyond visual line of sight operations.
We're talking about high altitude airspace here, above flight level 600 in the US. It's currently occupied mostly by military aircraft. In the past decade or so, new entrants like supersonics, hail fixed wing, and balloons that operate in different ways than what we've currently seen. It's not just your typical aircraft. And the fact that they're all going to be operating in the same airspace with each other, it proposes a super challenging and interesting problem that we can solve together. My name is Michelle Cady. I'm the ETM Program Manager for the engineering portion of the Class C Upper Airspace Operation Development. I work with Sherry Majaritz, who's developing the concept on this work. Our objective is concept development and engineering analysis to support future high-altitude operations. I wanted to be an engineer since I was little. I picked a track in aerospace engineering because it's clearly the coolest. But it's exciting, honestly. I'm getting to utilize those skills to work in a field and on programs like ETM that really interest me. My real interest is supersonics and high-speed aircraft, but all of these new entrants that are coming up are extremely interesting to me. The thought process behind creating these things, the new atmospheres that they can reach and abilities that they have is just very cool. Our main focus is trying to figure out how exactly that these different aircraft are going to interact. The disparate vehicle types mean that we have to take a different look at how they're going to interact with each other, especially since we're mixing unmanned vehicles with piloted vehicles and fast movers with slow movers. It's a whole different ballgame than what we've seen before. Given the predicted increase in commercial operations in high-altitude airspace, we need a management model that provides flexibility for these operations. We're going to be trying to do this with operator coordination from one level to another and leveraging principles of cooperative separation that we've learned through UTM efforts. And we're also going to take into account these unique characteristics of all the high-altitude vehicles and specific operational needs. There's minimal services provided in Upper Class E currently. There are operators that are flying today and they coordinate with ATC as appropriate, but those solutions aren't scalable for how many aircraft and the different types that we anticipate in the future. These vehicles provide communication infrastructure support, internet in areas that don't currently have it. They are able to move around the world and provide it to different locations. Another thing that these vehicles can provide is commercial transportation. That's the supersonics and potentially hypersonic aircraft transporting people at much quicker speeds. Environmental data collection is something else that is on the table. Sampling the atmosphere or scanning for forest fires are all applications that these vehicles are able to provide in this airspace. The current model that we're looking at is a cooperative approach for above flight level 600. Cooperative separation is a traffic management approach that relies on information sharing between the operators. This ultimately provides situational awareness to operators and VFR-like flexibility for high-altitude operations. The FAA's main goal, obviously since this is still our airspace in Upper Class E, is to maintain the safety and equitability between all of the operators.
There are a multitude of new information sharing techniques that we are going to try and utilize. We are currently collaborating with NASA and industry to decide how operators can most effectively communicate and share this airspace with one another.
In this specific project, there's real-world opportunities that these new entrants get to actualize, and it allows operators to decide how they want to interact with each other by agreeing on these community-based rules while we're developing the concept, as opposed to coming in later and just having to follow what's already been established. I want these operations to be realized because I want to be able to fly on a supersonic aircraft one day or get Wi-Fi from balloons in the middle of the ocean. All of these operators provide such unique capabilities. We want to be able to support these operations by promoting Class E airspace management effectively. There's a need for high altitude or stratospheric operations throughout the world. We're hoping that our ETM concept will eventually help to inform other countries' development of stratospheric and high altitude operations. If you want more information, you can go to our ETM website to get an overview of the project and see some current documentation that we have up there.
In today's world, we are connected to so many different things at our fingertips. A world that's able to transport people and goods and information in a relatively routine manner. My name is Baruch Abraham. I am the manager for the Advanced Concepts branch within the FAA's Next Gen organization, specifically in the Technology Development and Prototyping division. These remarks are really going to be focused on highlighting the work we've been doing, the great progress we've been making in realizing this future of urban air mobility, where we're really able to take advantage of and introduce a whole new concept, a new set of capabilities, and open up a new aviation market to areas that we don't serve today. Aviation, it's a fairly young industry, considering in just over 100 years that it's existed. It's gone from an industry that was used primarily by the rich and the elites back 100 years ago to now an industry that's open to everyday people like us. It's become more affordable. It has become more accessible. It's opened up the world to us. There is still a piece of our day-to-day lives and a piece of the world market that is underserved by aviation. The problem in our cities is congestion. That congestion has continued to grow to a point where most of us are spending hours a day going either direction and, as part of our daily commutes. But aviation could potentially open that environment and potentially introduce a new way of traveling that can alleviate that traffic congestion, that can help improve our day-to-day lives by giving us more time to do what we need to do rather than sitting in traffic. We really can't be skeptical of these technologies anymore. They are not that far in our future. We were asked to participate in Uber Elevate, and at that time that was Uber's second such conference, seeing the vision that Uber had, how they were connecting the data. They're able to really map out, for example, in the city of Los Angeles, where people travel at certain times of the day, so they could have really data-driven approach to, hey, we are moving people from these areas to these areas at these times, and it takes us X amount of time. Here are the variables that play a role in that. That was really when the light bulb went off in my head. You know, industry recognizes an opportunity. They've identified a market to serve. That airspace still has to continue to accommodate operations as we know them today. Traditional helicopters operating at lower altitudes, general aviation aircraft and airplanes going in and out of smaller airports closer to the city centers, or whether that be the law enforcement, public safety operations that are also taking place in the airspace around it. The US and the FAA have been leaders, and a lot of other countries look to us to follow. We are also very much, and rightly so, cautious. We look at new issues and new challenges with a critical eye, and that's absolutely still the reason why we are the safest airspace system in the world. We still also have to balance and evolve with the world around us, whether it's the industry that's looking to grow in this area in urban air mobility or other new entrant type of operations. Unless we are actually able to incorporate them while still maintaining our safe and efficient national airspace system, they will look to other markets. They will look to other areas where it may be easier for them to get to. We have to have a paradigm shift from using air traffic controllers and our traditional air traffic services as a way to manage traffic. We have to look to creative solutions. We have to look to new ideas. In NextGen, we started an engagement with our partners at NASA. What we didn't want to do is make assumptions about what we thought urban air mobility would look like, what the transition would be, what type of technologies would be in place, when they would be available, what the use cases were. We were able to participate in one-on-one listening sessions where we had industry stakeholders representing aircraft manufacturers, operators, service providers, and some local city officials that gave us a perspective of their role, their vision, and their objectives. We were able to truly get an idea of what these operations could look like. Everybody saw themselves realizing their visions differently. Some operators were looking for a market that is strictly looking at moving people. Some operators saw their objectives as carrying large cargo. Some envisioned a world where people are able to fly their own personal aircraft that are easy to operate, highly automated. Some saw a world where unmanned aircraft are able to carry passengers from rooftop to rooftop. All these different types of operations still would need to operate in the same environment, but they all introduce a level of intricacy, a level of challenge that has to be overcome. The common element in all of this was a recognition that these instrument and visual flight rules as they exist today will just not be adequate to address the need. There is some need for a new way of thinking, a new way of approaching air traffic management. We have to start with defining the concept of operation. We need a common reference so that when we're talking about urban air mobility, we're all talking about the same thing. Earlier this year in the spring, we developed an initial concept of operation that envisions the initial state of urban air mobility as we see it along the progression steps. And that's truly a reflection of all these different stakeholder engagements we had and what we heard. It describes the initial state, the initial set of operations that are envisioned. It's not going to be a a light switch or a revolution where we wake up one day and we're going to have all these unmanned aircraft carrying people flying overhead. It's going to be an incremental process. A methodical transition from the current rules and the current types of aircraft we're used to seeing to that world. And that first step is still operations with pilots on board. And we'll start with urban areas with lower density of operations, and then slowly migrating from that to increasing levels of density, increasing levels of complexity, maybe with regard to the types of airspace we may be operating within. So that is where we start introducing the notion of corridors that is included in the concept. These corridors are meant to be a way to separate aircraft that are operating within the current air traffic rules and procedures versus those that are going to be operating within what we envision are those tailored rules. Within these corridors, the idea is that there will be performance requirements that would be defined, that would be made known, and aircraft operators, pilots that are able to meet these performance requirements are able to operate within these corridors without the need to interact with air traffic control and air traffic services. In a way, it's a further maturation and growth of current helicopter routes and VFR corridors we're familiar with in some areas. But the difference being that we start introducing tailored flight rules or community-based rules to strategically and tactically separate aircraft from one another. And the idea of these corridors is that they are also known to all stakeholders, so that those that are looking to operate within them and or those that are looking to operate outside of them know where they are. So we will be working towards ways to identify how these corridors are then made to be known. Any aircraft that are looking to operate within these corridors or traverse these corridors, the idea is then they would have to meet whatever performance requirements that would be in place. And these performance requirements could be things similar to the ability to share intent. So aircraft have to make their intent known, so others that are within the corridors or also crossing those corridors would be aware and would be able to avoid them. And the ability to share intent and other information that's needed to make sure that we're safely and efficiently deconflicting aircraft are also enabled through providers of services for UAM or PSUs. Those PSUs are those entities that are really at the heart of the architecture we envision. And that information exchange architecture with those PSUs in the middle enables the operator to share their intent with their respective PSU. And those PSUs are able to look across their own set of operations as well as across the network of PSUs to identify potential conflicts where aircraft may be looking to occupy the same space in the same time. So they could strategically deconflict these operations through negotiations, as well as those PSUs could also have additional services that support tactical separation that could potentially augment tactical separation technologies that may be on board the aircraft, or they may be able to provide technologies and ground-based infrastructure that is able to provide surveillance and support the need for tactical separation. These PSUs that are also potentially in some ways unique or a variation of the service providers that provide services at lower altitude for UTM are also able to exchange information. So USSs for UTM and PSUs are also able to exchange information through this network environment so that all operations that are being serviced by these entities are safely deconflicted. we are going to address those ideas and come up with potential solutions to address those gaps and continue progressing towards the implementation. We've realized a lot of these new ideas and capabilities, and there's some that we're continuing to work on to make sure that we are keeping up with technology, to make sure we're keeping up with the demand, to make sure we're keeping up with the needs of our workforce. Looking beyond the next 10 years, we fully expect a world that is an operational environment, a national airspace system that is made up of commercial airline operations, the regionals, the business jets, the general aviation, and all those that we're used to seeing every day. But on top of that, this growing industry in small drones, small UAS operations, in urban air mobility, commercial space operations, commercial operations in the upper class E airspace, where we're truly taking advantage of the national airspace system with more diverse set of operations and more new users, new entrants, technology giants that are truly new to the environment. There's a risk in the US falling behind the current air traffic management paradigm as we know it today. It's going to hinder innovation because the rules and the technologies and the processes and the procedures are really meant to support traditional air traffic operations. Look beyond what we know for air traffic management. Look beyond the traditional world that we're used to living in for aviation. Imagine aviation in the same way you imagine your cell phone from 10 years ago to now. Imagine a world where we can do things better. Be open-minded, continue to get involved, whether it's through continuing to support the ongoing research, continuing to represent your respective organizations, continuing to represent your respective businesses through standards development bodies, through ongoing research, and just keep an eye out for this industry to continue to grow. I truly can't express how grateful I am to be able to work in this area in this day and age. I want to recognize and thank all the partners that are continuing to help us through our urban air mobility maturation work, and we look forward to the continued collaboration in the future. And speaking of that future, I can't wait for the time that we can look back and say, yeah, we were involved in this work in its infancy.